Okay, hi, welcome to our next talk, second to last session of the day. We have Vincent Kok, who is an engineering manager from Atlassian on the Trello team, and he has a wonderful talk lined up for you. He is tall, he's from Holland, and he is an expert on remote work, especially from being on the Trello team, which has a total remote culture. So hopefully you learn a ton from him. Welcome, Vincent.
Thank you. Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for showing some interest in remote work this afternoon. I actually liked the keynote this morning. It was a bit of a warm-up for this session. That's great. Remote is getting more and more popular, and I think it's good to share some experiences around that. A little bit about myself. As Shannon said, I'm on the Trello team. I'm Dutch as well, but that's something you might hear immediately. The only thing you should remember about me is actually like my Twitter handle. If you have questions, you want to reach out, feel free to do so. Before we get into remote, let's go one step back a little bit. Like, hey, what about the office? Why are we all in an office, and why is it so popular? I think the good thing about offices is that collaboration happens easily, right? Your culture grows as you're together as a group of people, but that's something you still have to nurture. But like, things happen more easily. The same with like serendipity. So people walk around, meet each other, bump into each other, and have random conversations. And as a human, having real people around you is a good thing as well. So you can have some social interaction, you can even have some social activities. So these are just a few examples why there is a case for an office space. And I think we also have been doing this for decades, so we all trained very well how to work together in an office setting. But offices are not always great. Not everyone has the same cool offices A and Z has, which they showed this morning in the office. If you don't like open office plans very well, then you can struggle to get stuff done. So offices can be not a great place to work as well. So it makes it very hard to get things done instead of that it like helps you to get things done. And around commutes can be pretty bad as well. I live in New York City. If I go in the office in the subway, did anyone ride the New York subway? Few people, so it can be an interesting experience. It can work very well, it can be the opposite, so that's interesting. But for example, my brother-in-law, he does a 90-minute one-way commute every single day. If you add it up for every work day, you end up doing that around 600 hours a year, which is a lot of time you can spend on your hobby. And self-driving cars are not a common thing just yet, so he still has to do it himself. And we also optimize a lot of infrastructure for peak hours, right? So instead of like building a smaller road, we optimize for these few hours a day where everyone tries to go from A to B at the same point in time. So it's not very efficient. But it also has a big social demographic impact. If you look, for example, in the Bay Area and housing prices, it suddenly went up quite a big time. So if you're not in tech, you simply cannot afford to live there anymore. So people are being pushed out to the various areas and being forced to commute for 3 hours a day, which is a long time. And for some jobs, you simply have to be at a certain place and be there. But there is an alternative, like I said before, and that's where I want to chat about today, is like, why not go remote, and why not do this remote thing and give it a try? But whenever you talk to people about remote, they say, hey, it sounds good in theory, but I'm not sure whether this will work for my organization or not. Or people say, it doesn't work in my system, I'm not built up like that, I'm not set up like that. Or we tried remote, but my remote people were getting fired because they were invisible for the rest of the organizations. But what about the culture? How do we build a proper culture for our organization in such a case? That's something people are worried about, and they should, because it's a lot harder in a remote environment. But the interesting fact is that most of us work remote already. So who has been in a remote session or a video call in the last month? Like, you see, that's almost everyone. So we're already doing this thing all the time. We're in different buildings, we're in different offices, we're in different cities. There are many regions that you have to interact. You have customers being far away, or you have customers in other countries. So it's actually already something we do. I think the biggest problem is that we actually do it in a more office setting than we do it in a remote setting. So we try to mimic the office space in a remote fashion. And I think that's where the problem kicks in. Because that's what we have been learning, what we've been told for the last like 30 years or so. So that's what I basically want to talk about. And I only have a really short agenda, so hopefully we can get out of the bash very quickly. So there are two things. One is like, why should you even consider remote? Because there are a lot of benefits to it. The other thing is like, hey, if you decide to do so, or if you decide to give it a try, like how do you make it work, and what are the things and activities that you need to do to make it work? I think one thing I would like you to go away with is that you go back to your own setting, your own environment, and have a few practical things you can try out and do to make your remote work more efficient and more pleasant as well for your remote workers. So why should you consider remote? Why is this even a thing that's a good thing? I think the number one benefit is actually the access to talent. There are so many people around the globe, and even if you only look locally in your own country, there's so many things and people you don't access because they're just too far away. They don't want to move to your city. They don't want to commute that long. So suddenly you decrease your talent pool. There are a lot of cities as well where basically a lot of companies are competing for the same talent, the so-called war on talent. So it's kind of like suddenly you open up your talent pool for so many things. If you look at Trello, we have a lot of people who live in the middle of nowhere, but they're brilliant developers. So we're really happy to hire them. And they're really happy we hire them, so they work on a challenging project, but they can stay in the place where they are, which is pretty cool. But there's more to that. I think diversity has been already getting a lot of attention lately, also during this summit. But I think having a different, more cognitive input is really important as well. And if you have a remote team, it's getting diverse automatically. Because you don't have a group of people who live in the same city, in the same area, and most likely have the same thinking. You suddenly have people from all over the world, or maybe all over the country, and they think differently. They live in different communities, so they just look different at different problems. And I think that's a really good team to have. Like, I think the keynote 2 days ago, they showed some proof like why it's important to have different views and different perspectives on problems. And I think with remote, you get it kind of for free, or you get it, it's more easily accessible. The other thing is retention, and that might be a weird one, but what happens a lot when people move for their job or live in a certain area, some things in life change. You get, for example, kids, or you don't want to live in a certain city anymore because it's getting too crowded. And the implication of that mostly, if your company has only a place in that area, you have to leave your company. You basically have to find a new job based on that. And if you're in a remote environment, you work and just move along with you, so you don't have to move anymore. And you can just stay in the company where you're at. And that's a really good thing for your people and for your company as well. People don't leave. People have ease of mind as well. They actually stay. They can actually stay where they are, and that's not based on their location. It also offers a lot of flexibility, right? If you look at myself, for example, like you can go remote occasionally. And if you normally go remote occasionally, it's very disruptive to the team because suddenly they have to adjust their patterns because you decided to go away for a while. And for me, living overseas, I'd like to go home, but not use my vacation for that. So I actually work from home, and having that ability and not disrupting the team is really important. So we just continue to use the same patterns, but I can be wherever I want. Or you just travel around the nation a little bit and still are able to work. For families, it's really great as well. If you have to drop off your kid to daycare, or if you have to wait for a nanny, that's certainly a lot easier because you don't have to travel back and forth to the office anymore, or you don't have to figure out and say, hey, the nanny didn't show up, what's next? So again, this ease of mind is really, really easy and great for a family, and it's like gives a better work-life balance. And again, peace of mind. If something changes in your family situation or your personal situation, you can just stay or move along and stay at a job you really enjoy. So that's awesome. And it has some side effects as well. First of all, productivity. Like, office space can be very disruptive. Who in this audience ever made a comment or heard a comment like, I will be working from home today because I want to get something done? Almost everyone, so okay, maybe you should just stop here. If you work from home, you're always in that setting, and you still have access to everyone. So you're in this really high productive environment in your own safe space where you can get a lot of stuff done. You're also probably going to focus more on output. And this morning, trust came along a few times. If you not in one location anymore, it becomes more and more important to focus, hey, what is someone producing? What's the output of someone? Instead of like, hey, I saw this person like 12 hours in the office. There must be a lot of stuff going on. So instead of like, you will be very focused on output and probably going to measure that in some way. And lastly, a better product will be built as well. And maybe that's a bold statement, but I think there are two reasons for that. And maybe Trello is a little bit different because we're in the collaboration space and we use the tool a lot internally to actually get stuff done. So in that sense, we create a lot of input for ourselves to improve a product, work in a collaborative environment and remotely. But the other one again is like having a remote team, different insights from different parts of the world, just get a better product because of that. And I already mentioned the safe space for people where people just like to work and really enjoy it. They can build the office they really want to have and always wanted to have. These are just two examples of various peoples. We have a big Trello board where everyone shows off their office, which is really cool. For the people who are paying a lot of attention, there is have a camera light to get a good perspective when you're on a video call. But we're going to look at that a little bit later. Okay, that's kind of like the whole why. So I think there's a pretty good case to make for like why you should even consider remote and why it's actually a good thing to do. But there is hard work needed to actually get it done and make sure it actually works. So what are the things that you need to do? And I kind of said like I have a two-point agenda. I was lying a little bit because now this is actually the real agenda. There are 3 things to look at doing remote work, and I think every talk needs 3 points, so that's something you have to do. First of all, how do you play as a remote team? It's important to establish some patterns on how to work together in a remote environment. Secondly, you don't have a physical office space anymore. At least you should have a remote office, at least if you still have a physical office space. And you have to grow and nurture your culture. That's really important as well. Because like culture is key to your company and have people happy and stay them around. And in a remote environment that you have to do a lot more work because not all the things happen automatically. Okay, let's get started with how to be productive. And I want to start with a story about monkeys. And there is a point to this, I promise you. And it might sound slightly cruel in the beginning, so I apologize for that. There was an experiment done, I think, in the 60s, where they put 3 monkeys in a cage. They put a ladder in the middle with a banana on top. And what happens when the first thing the monkeys did when they went up, they basically to get the banana, because that's what they instinctively do, they got sprayed wet. So they know, hey, when I try to touch the ladder, when I try to go for the banana, I get punished. So at some point, they swapped out a monkey, and a new monkey came in and said, hey, a banana, let's do this. Went up, but the other monkeys pulled him down and said, hey, this is not something we do in this cage. And at some point, all monkeys were rotated, and new monkey came in, monkey went up, and basically, the other monkeys pulled him down. So the monkeys were just copying behavior and saying, hey, we don't want you to get this banana. We actually don't know why, but that's what we do here. And I think the point is that like have been in these office spaces so long, we're doing the same. Well, when we're doing remote work, and then we have to unlearn things. And I want to discuss a few of the things we have to unlearn. And I think if you want to remember one thing of this presentation is a value we call assume remote. So the one rule we have, which is really important, if one person is remote, everyone is remote. So if you're just thinking of doing it, you have to be quite into it, because like it has a lot of implications to actually do. If you don't stick to this rule, it will be a very painful experience for your team in the office and for the persons outside of the office. And I will show you what I actually mean by that. And I started with an example of the thing where we actually broke our own rule. We did an offsite not too long ago, and one of our teammates couldn't make it, unfortunately. And we put him on the big screen. And we had 20 people in a room and 1 person remotely on a screen. And as you can imagine, there must be a horrible experience for this person, because like he was like miles and miles away, listening to people, and he could probably pick up a lot of the conversations. But what happens? You create a lot of conversations in the meantime as well, and actually you miss out on a lot, and you're basically creating a local optimum for someone, which is a bad thing for someone who's not remote. We also do funny things in offices. This is a picture I took a few weeks ago in our San Francisco office. And we have these big meeting rooms, and we build a lot of infrastructure around meeting rooms in our office. And then you see 2 people having a meeting, which is very inefficient because you have to go to the meeting room. You can't see each other very well. A lot of times it takes a while to set up a call, because I'm pretty sure everyone has been in a meeting where it took 5 minutes to set the call up. And audio quality can be fairly low as well. But that's what we try to do. We mimic office behavior and try to copy 2 offices next to each other so it looks like we're in the same office space. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. If you compare it to, like, for example, using a tool like Zoom, where you have a Brady Bunch view, more to that later. Suddenly everyone who's remote, or everyone basically is in a remote playing field, and everyone is equal. So audio quality is good. I can still see cues and visual, non-physical cues. I can actually see it and can respond to that. And for those who are paying attention to detail in this picture, you see everyone is muted, just to make sure that there are not background noises anymore. And the nice side effect is that whenever someone unmutes, you know, hey, this person wants to talk. So you have this automatically like self-directing thing where basically people say, hey, I'm going to say something, so people will wait before the person finished. And that's pretty powerful and really simple. The other one which is key for us is core hours. And it was mentioned this morning as well. A big problem, I think, that people see with remote work and why they're hesitant is that they actually say, hey, that means different time zones, isn't it? And it can be true in some cases, and I think in a lot of companies you will have different time zones, but time zones are a different problem. So it's up to you and your organization to figure out how to deal with it. But remote work is not different time zones. So that's why Trello introduced core hours, and basically it means everyone is aligned between 12 and 4 p.m. Eastern time, which is in New York. If you're okay with that, then you can basically work wherever you want if it's sustainable. Probably means like you can't work from Australia because that's not sustainable, right? Starting at 1 a.m. But we have people in Europe and they start a little bit afternoon and they work the afternoon and evening shift. But we also have people in Hawaii and they start at 5 a.m. And that person decided like, hey, I like surfing, I can't do surfing where I was, so I go to Hawaii, start at 5 a.m., work until 2, and then can surf the whole afternoon. So if you're up for that, then you can have a pretty good lifestyle while working for a nice tech company and the product you want to work on. So it's a really simple rule, but really powerful, and you communicate expectation you have for people quite early instead of like people are being surprised by that or creating a problem while people are not aligned where they should be. Because doing everything asynchronous is really hard. For example, if we have to collaborate with Sydney from New York, that's always a little bit painful because it's like very early in New York or very early in Sydney or very early in New York. So that's a different problem to solve. Also, make sure you have the basic rights. Are there any Australians in the room? So you probably will struggle sometimes with fast internet, but but it's really important to make sure you have like the right connection in place. Also, make sure you have a good camera and a good audio, have a good microphone. And some people have this little backlight, which they do to me right now, to make sure you have the right visuals and you're not like this dark shade on a camera. And also make sure you have a proper home setup in place. So don't use your kitchen table because that probably won't be good for your back as well. So those are just the basic things to make right. A lot of people like to have a separation between life and work, so they create a separate home office, basically a door they can close and make sure like, hey, I close the door, I'm done with my job. Because that's one of the risks, right? Because like you're at home, you can basically go back to work any single time. And that's up to you whether you want it or not. And this is interesting because if you look, this is a photo of the New York office. And you see we have a lot of small little office spaces. So if you want to do video calls and everyone has an open space plan, it will be very loud and very noisy. And you will be interrupting each other's calls as well. So most people have a private office. And that works really well because you close the door and you can basically do all the calls you want to do. And that also reduces like the feeling that like you're not in that you're in a real office. You're basically in your own remote environment, but in an office space. And quite interesting, this floor flooded, I think 6 months ago, was around Christmas last year. And suddenly we were all in the same open plan for a while. And that's where the system broke down a little bit because we had one meeting and suddenly all meeting rooms were occupied by the one meeting because we were all sitting in different rooms and didn't coordinate it correctly. So think about like how would you do if you have an office space and you have a lot of people who need to hop on calls all the time, that you actually make sure they have the option to go in a small place or can do it from their own office space. Otherwise it will be painful. All right. This was kind of like the more what kind of things you need to do in process you have to have as a team. But how do you make sure you go from, you build still like an office kind of environment, but then remotely? And if you look at how it is at Trello, and I think it will happen automatically quite quickly, is that chat becomes the office space. That's where people hang out, right? That's where a lot of chatter happens. That's where you randomly meet people. And to foster that as much as possible, we actually try to be very deliberate about our rooms or our channels. So just a few examples. You see here like announcements. That's something everyone will be looking at. Because in an office space, you can shout or put something, tick someone on the shoulder and get attention. In a remote environment, that's not possible anymore. So people will be very deliberate with like which rooms they will get notified on and which not. And if you pay attention closely, you see there's a separate one for the NYC office, because remote people are not interested that there is cake in New York, or they will get like office FOMO. We also be very deliberate where we discuss certain things. So this is the Trello room where we discuss things about the product. But we also like have off-topic where we chat about random stuff, where we discuss the latest gadget, which you definitely should buy, or whether it's a waste of money. And again, we have the same thing for the office. So excuse me. That's where we discuss mostly things in the office which is less relevant for people remotely. One other rule we kind of have, and I made a mistake when I joined the Trello team, is basically say, hey, add here, let's get everyone attention. And people were very upset with that, and I didn't understand why initially. I did that, and this card popped up on my one-on-one board with my manager. Like, this is, how do we do add here and all at the Trello team? So I thought I was in trouble. I was a little bit, no, not really. But it basically means like if you treat chat or that environment as your office space and you do an here at the whole, it has to be important, because you basically wake 150 people up because everyone is paying closely attention to the chat. So it basically is like, hey, I'm running around in the office space and start to shout around, which is something you probably won't do unless it's really important, like a fire or something like that. The other thing that's quite interesting is like the increase of use of emojis, because like it's hard to convey emotion in text. I think emojis really help with that, to say, hey, this is how I actually feel about certain things. And that's something that's really important as well, to provide a little bit more context in the messages you have, especially if you have people from basically everywhere, right? Where you have people like me, a non-native English speaker. Sometimes when you type something up, it can read quite harsh instead of like something with a smile, if you try to mean that. So how does remote collaboration work most of the times? I think there are two things quite easily, right? You always start things like either asynchronous, you create a Confluence page or another document. You create a ticket, Trello card, and that's where the discussions start. That's what you would do in an office space as well. The other thing, like we looked at before, is chat. You basically spend a lot of time in chat doing things. But what you would normally do in an office space is you hop in a room if you need a further discussion, or you go to a whiteboard. And that's where a lot of high bandwidth discussions happen. So that's not non-existent in a remote environment. So you have to have a tool where you can hop in a video quite quickly. There are many tools around. Our favorite is Zoom, because you just click a button and share a link with everyone around you, and things work really well. And you have a really high bandwidth, high quality meeting without searching for a meeting room. So it's very efficient as well. And again, make sure you have a tool where you can see everyone, and you can have a lot of detail, like how people are responding and interacting to non-verbal cues. So that's really important to say, to see how people behave, because that's what you have in a real meeting space as well. You can see how people react. If you don't have that, then you will lose information. One other thing that's key is basically having the right real-time keys, because like you want to collaborate quickly and in a real-time fashion as much as possible. This is just an example of like a work setup, like we use a lot in Zoom, in Trello, having a Zoom chat on one hand and having a Trello board on the other hand. I think one of the advantages of Trello is like it's real time, so everyone has the same view all the time. Everyone can drag and drop things or update, and it will be reflected immediately. And that's a small detail, but it's very powerful. Same if you do, for example, collaborative editing in Confluence. Again, everyone can collaborate and contribute, and it's very powerful again. One common question we kind of get, like, hey, how you do whiteboarding sessions? This is an example of Mural, which we use quite a bit, and it's kind of like this big pane we have where you basically can say, hey, just drag and drop stuff or draw and interact in that way. It's maybe not as good as a whiteboard, but it comes pretty close. There's just a few examples, but please make sure that you find out like tools where you can collaborate easily and in a high bandwidth fashion. Interesting detail for Mural is basically where you see the mouse pointer of each other moving, so you actually see what everyone is doing, which is a lot of fun and can be very annoying as well. So the key takeaway here is like you have to forget about a physical office space, right? So you shouldn't try to copy and mimic office behavior in a remote environment. If you do, there will be pain, and you will lose like great collaboration. There are a few examples of that. I recently found out like in one of our offices we have a whiteboard camera. So this camera that is pointed and directed at a whiteboard, which kind of sounds good in theory, but like you kind of look at it, there's a person remote looking at 2 or 3 people collaborating and actually drawing, which is kind of painful because it's hard to interact, and it's kind of like optimized for that office setting again, which again is not great. The other one is like digital boards. I think there are many of them nowadays where you have a few people on one side, a few people on the other side, and it kind of syncs the drawing behavior. But again, you're trying to copy office behavior in a remote fashion. One thing we tried as well was telepresence robots, so you could remotely control a robot and roam around the office, but it was just really creepy when you suddenly had a robot like behind you, so we stopped doing that. So remember, your computer is your office now. That's where you do all your work, and that's where you have to focus on and find the right tools to get stuff done, which makes it really flexible, because as long as you have your computer with you, you're good. All right, one more thing. Having a remote culture, and culture is always like an interesting topic to talk about. What does it even mean? It's very intangible. So if you look at what it actually means, it basically means like the attitudes and behavior of a certain social group. In this case, it's a bunch of people working remotely together. So that's something you have to nurture and have to build and optimize for. And I think remote culture is really important that you focus on 3 things. The first one is trust. The second one is connection, and as a connection you normally build up easily in an office space. And the last one is empathy. So how do you create the same empathy you have for people you know and you're already connected with? Okay, let's start with trust. So trust is key to build up, and I think there are a few ways to build it up, right? I think the first one I already mentioned earlier is to focus on output and basically make sure you judge people on like what they produce instead of like how much time they spend in an office. And I think that's really good because then you focus on outcome instead of like being there, and you want them to be impactful instead of like just doing busy work. And one other thing we have is like we have senior leadership who are remote too. So it's not like a few people who are remote. We have actually senior leaders that are remote too, so they know how it is and they experience it as well. And we try to create as much visibility as possible. So we already said we're an open company, and I think that shows here as well. So everyone can basically see everything around, like how projects are going, how metrics are tracking, and basically like how to stay up to date on certain things. So have an open backlog, have channels to have status updates to see where things are going. Another example is like a weekly overview Trello board we have, where everyone basically says, hey, this is what happened this week, and this is what we kind of produced. So that makes it a really easy and simple way of keeping track of where things are at. The second thing is connection, and it's hard to build connection in a remote environment, right? Because the true connection is built when you meet people as well. That's why we're here as well, to hear about things, but also to connect with people who are in the same thing and learn from each other, and that makes it a lot easier in person. And that's why this is a physical thing and not a remote thing. So one of the things we do for onboarding is like we fly people of the team to New York for their first week. So the first week at Trello is an HQ, which is really powerful because we have time for social events, and the team can connect and get to know each other in person. So next time you see each other on the screen, you actually know who the person is. My wife, for example, she works for a remote-only company, and her first week was basically a box that arrived in the mailbox, which was an interesting experience, and it's a lot rougher than coming to a physical office space. We also do it on team level as well. So when you join your first week, we have a lot of like welcome sessions and meet different people across the company. Most of them are in video call, but make sure you start to build a connection with everyone around you and know what everyone is doing. A lot of teams are actually also like a 30-minute social hangout. So what you would normally probably do during lunch, you actually do it on a video call. You spend 30 minutes chatting, hey, what are you planning this weekend, or what are you up to tonight, or what's your favorite hobby? So those are the small little tactics where you can use and build a connection as a remote team. And the last one is offsites. I think a lot of teams do them already. But like, I think you have to be a little bit more frequent and maybe travel a little bit more than you would normally do just to get together on a place. What's most efficient as a team to be there and work together for a week and get a connection and real-life collaboration going. One other thing we do is like once a year we come together as a group and we basically have 3 days of fun. When I went for the first time, I thought, we're probably going to do a lot of workshopping as well. But they kind of said like, no, that's not what we do. We're basically going to connect because work with is something we can do remote, connecting is something we can't do remote. So that's where we focus on. So it's kind of like a small minification with the whole team, which is pretty cool. We also do a monthly town hall. So during the town hall, we basically hang out at the beginning, and again, it's remote friendly, so we just hang out on a call, so there's no like a set of meeting rooms. It's basically everyone is on a call, so everyone is equal, whether you're in the office or, I don't know, in Hawaii. And that's really powerful because it gives us a combination of social time and actually also the ability to share the message you want to share. And in the form of like over-communicating, during this session, we always repeat like the values of the company. This is what we think is important. And assume remote is something we mention every time as well. So that's almost in the vein like, hey, as a remote company, you have to over-communicate a little bit. One other thing that offices optimize for, or some offices at least do, is like serendipity. So basically, you meet people at the water cooler, at the coffee machine, and that's something that doesn't happen in a remote space. If you look at the Apple office, they build the office in a circle, so everyone goes to the center, and that's where people randomly meet each other. And we have a similar thing, but then online. So we call this, it's a bot, and it's connected with Trello, obviously, and it's called Mr. Rogers. I'm not sure if anyone knows the TV series. It's about Meet Your Neighbor. And we basically, this bot selects random people in a certain group, binds them together, and they will set up a video call and chat for 30 minutes about the things they want to chat about, which is really powerful. So they can connect and you meet people you normally wouldn't speak. So basically make sure serendipity happens in an online fashion. The other thing is having inclusive events. So if you organize events in the office, you have to have a remote counterpart as well. So this is an example where we have Friends and Family Day, which is an Atlassian-wide thing, and every office organizes something. But it would be kind of cruel and introduce a lot of FOMO for people remote if you don't have a remote version. So every event we have in an office, we have a remote version as well. So in this example, we go out, you can invite your family or friends, and we do something fun. And everyone who's remote gets a certain budget. And again, to build this connection and community, people share a photo on what they have been doing on the Trello board as well. So you can actually see other people, you can see the family, and actually say, hey, this is interesting. You get a little bit more background and a sneak peek of how they are living. And not sure whether this is a requirement, but if you look at Trello, it's where you have more than 60% of people like being remotely. And that kind of creates some sort of critical mass. And if you have a critical mass, then you're probably going to optimize as a company for that critical mass as well. So we try to balance that a little bit. It's not mandatory, but it makes it easier to organize the company as such. But again, like even if it starts already at one, so if you have one person remote, everyone should be remote, whether in the office space or not. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is empathy, and that's a key thing to build up as a remote team, because doing empathy well in a remote fashion is a lot harder. And if you look at the Atlassian Values, does everyone know the Atlassian Values? I see no hands, so they're available online. I'm not going to talk about these. But one thing that was kind of interesting when Trello joined Atlassian, they had a similar value as well. So in Atlassian we have a sixth value. It's the unofficial value. It's called seek first to understand. So when people rock up and you say, hey, what do you actually mean? Or this is weird. Then you try to figure out like, hey, why did you mention it as such? Why are you doing things I think you shouldn't do, and try to understand what the motivation is for certain things instead of like going into it immediately. And Trello had the same kind of like value as well, assume positive intent. So when you have a remote conversation, it can be a bit crude or a bit like, hey, this is harsh, why is people responding as such? So it was kind of funny to see that like Trello had the same value as Atlassian had as well. And I think that's really important to have that mindset as a team, because otherwise things get lost quite easily in translation, which happens a lot when you type. Another thing that's really important as well is having context. So when you message people, is make sure like, hey, why are you asking a certain question? If you meet someone in real life and they ask you a question which you might find passive aggressive, you kind of see like, hey, why are you asking this question? And if someone has a friendly face, then you're probably cool. If someone has like a slightly angry or upset face, you say, hey, I might be in trouble. So if you kind of ask like, hey, how are you doing with your Q4 project? How are the results going? If you explain why you're interested in the information, then that's really beneficial for people as well, because they know, okay, this person is doing another thing that's dependent on that, so you actually know why why they're asking that, and you don't have to be worried about certain thing. And these are all the small little things that really enable and that empathy and create this culture of trust within the company. All right, 3 things I want you to remember if you leave this place. First thing is why remote, and talent is a big thing. You have access to so many people than you actually would have in your one physical place, and that I think counts for almost every area. The other thing is, like, if one person goes remote, everyone goes remote, and that's something you have to consider when you do it. I was chatting this morning with someone about going occasional remote, and if you do that like as one person in the team, and the team is not set up for going remotely, then that's if you go remote, it's painful for the rest of the team, right? Because they have to adjust their processes or the way they work. If you go remote and everyone goes remote, that goes away. And then occasional remote is fine as well, because the team doesn't have to adjust. And the last one is empathy. You have to level up your empathy big time, because doing remote communication and doing it like where you don't see people that often is a lot harder. You have to think about it, how you communicate with other people. That's it. Thank you so much. We have a few minutes left. Oh. Okay, we have a few minutes left for questions, so fire away. Hi. Oh.
Hi, thank you. A quick question for you that you touched on in more detail than I was expecting, I think. We have a partially distributed software development team, and they are both home working and based in a remote office. Mm-hmm. But we don't have the office configuration that you mentioned that would support team members who are involved in a Zoom meeting or a conference call to go and seek individual spaces to join that meeting. So in your experience, which is the better choice? To keep those team members in the open plan office who are in the office and potentially be disruptive to the rest of the room, or to do what you suggested initially that you shouldn't do, which is have the remote people on the big telly at the end of the conference room?
I think if you like having people on a big telly in the conference room, I think that's for me personally like a no-go, because then kind of like you create this uneven situation again. And I personally feel the quality of those tools is not always like great as well from a video or like audio perspective. If you like, I think doing all the calls in the open space plan is very disruptive for other people. So having a mechanism where people can retreat easily, like for example in some of our offices where we don't have these private spaces, because sometimes like you enter in a remote situation but you don't have the office set up like that, and it's hard to change. We put in a lot of these phone booths. So basically they're like one-person meeting rooms where you can go in easily. You can't reserve them. The only thing you have to balance then is like, hey, are there enough available? Because you don't want to end up in a situation where people need to retreat but they don't have a place. So finding a way how to organize it is key. I personally feel like having private offices, it might sound a little bit old-fashioned, but I think it works really well in a remote setting. Thank you. I think there was one question here as well.
It's more not of a question, but of appreciation about the empathy, because basically today I heard a lot of empathy stuff from Trello folks, and we also drew, because we are also distributed and dispersed around the world, and we have 10-hour difference between our teams, so we don't have overlapping hours. We do Skype beer drinking sessions and faulty karaoke with Skype lagging, and it's a cacophony, but everyone like starts being much easier going and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
That's it.
I think we discussed doing Zoom karaoke for quite a while as well, but everyone says it's impossible with the lag, but maybe we should give it a try now. Anyone else? All right, thanks for attending and enjoy the rest of the summit.